Awesome. Well, we are here and ready to get started. Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Power Lounge. This is your place to hear authentic conversations from women in digital who have power to share. My name is Amy Vaughn, and I am the owner and chief empowerment officer of Together Digital. We are a diverse and collaborative community of women who work in digital, marketing, advertising, tech, who choose to share their knowledge, power, and connections, much like the fabulous Clara, who is with us here today. If you want to learn more about us, you can at www.togetherindigital.com. And this week, I am here to introduce all of you to Clara. I'm going to see, I just get too nervous. Matonhodze, that wasn't even close. Strode has been a member of Together Digital for the past 3 years, mainly serving or recently serving as an advisory board member. When she's not an active member of our community, she is also the founder of the MCS agency, a digital marketing communications agency that helps clients clearly and effectively communicate the messages to the right audiences by using an integrated mix of tactics, strategies, SaaS, and SaaS products. Clara proudly employs the principles of Ubuntu, which is our topic today, in her businesses. Before starting her own business, Clara worked in multiple organizations, including the Cincinnati Museum Center, where she directed the adult and cultural lectures and large-scale festivals. Fun. Her roots run deep with the African immigrant community. For years, she has convened the African Foundation USA annual symposium with Xavier University, bringing together leaders from the African community. Clara is also the co-founder and ex officio of the Pan-African group AppNet. Recently, she received a leadership award for Global Diaspora One Voice Consortium. In true Ubuntu fashion, Clara can be found assisting not only the African causes, but the Indian Film Festival of Cincinnati Sister Cities International, where she serves as secretary and key community partner for Cincinnati Campus. Clara, thank you so much for being here with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. So excited.
Yes. So some of you may have heard kind of in past conversations, I had come across this term Ubuntu by chance, sitting in a guided meditation and a story about Ubuntu. And I don't want to give anything away. I want Clara to talk about it, but I was so touched by the philosophy of it. And I was like, yes, I want and need to see more of this, in our businesses, in our communities, and in our world. And so we were on one of our board calls and I was, nerding out about this thing. And Claire's like, well, yeah, of course, talking about my motherland and where this has come from. And this is such a big part of how we were raised and brought up. And so it just felt right to have, someone who has lived within that culture and then experienced our culture coming into America. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to learn and grow as leaders and as people when we kind of look outside our own culture. So Clara, I appreciate you coming here to talk with us today about this. But before we get started on the discussion about the power of Ubuntu, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more, our listeners, a little bit more about you.
Thanks, Amy. Oh gosh, where do I start? So let's see. I mean, you can always read about, my history and stuff like that, where I've worked, because I feel like I've exhausted that topic in a lot of published articles. So I would like to focus on probably the things that we don't usually talk about when we are saying who we are, and so there's a story that always, like, since this happened to me, I'm always thinking about it. And I think it really exemplifies who I am as a person. Like, for example, I've gone through a lot of therapy, right? So professional therapy, stuff on my own, a lot of professional development workshops, all those like personality exercises that we do to find out who you are, the Enneagrams, Myers-Briggs, you name them. I have done a program where I've had to do something similar. And the one thing that has always dominated those is I don't have a strong personality, right? And so it has always been in my head, like, why don't I ever come like 90% in this area, right? I'm always like right around the little borders of this and that and that and everything. Now, there was this training that I was taking when I worked for an organization, and we had to go for like a month-long training in this organization. And there was, so one of those tests came up with a trainer, and we had to figure out who we are. And we spent like 3 days just digging into our personalities to make us really proficient salespeople, you know? And so when it came to me, she was like, I was like, how come I'm never dominant in anything? And then right away, she's like, oh my gosh, you have such a rare personality, you know? And I'm like, really? Why? It's like, because as people, we like to box people, right? We like to be easily, and we would like to be able to say, this person is that, this person is that, this person is that. And that's how we go through life. And then she's like, now people with your personality are very rare because you don't belong in a particular box. And then she's like, I bet you in your relationships, you don't have a singular core group of people. You tend to evolve around friendships and different groups. And it is so true. Like even going back to high school, you know, I just had never had that core group that I'm like, I'm in the cool girls, or I'm in the bookie people. You know, I've always evolved around those groups of friends. Like I feel I belong everywhere. You know, I could easily fit in with any of those groups. So it was that moment that I'm like, okay, I think I finally understand who I am. All this therapy and whatnot that I have done, I just needed to meet you.
Right? There was nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, yeah.
It does describes you well, Clara, because I mean, I know you, we've spent time together. And I think that is one of the beautiful and amazing things about you is that, you know, there's just this sense of calm and wisdom and observation and acceptance about you that just makes it easy to be around. And I don't think a lot of people can offer that very often. So I think it's really a gift. That's so cool. I never knew all that though.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So yeah, yeah. So that's, you know, so I guess in a nutshell, that will tell you, you know, what who I am.
Yeah.
Right. Go right to the core without
Right.
the BS, without all the neatly written
Right.
chronographical resumes and whatnot. Yeah.
No, I mean, I read that amazing bio of yours, so that's a little glimpse, but that I think really kind of gets to the heart and the soul of who you are, which I think is also awesome. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm curious. We've got live listeners with us today. For those who are listening to the podcast after the fact, I'm kind of curious if you all know how to do the reactions at the bottom of the screen to raise your hand. I'm curious how many women who are listening sort of were those people in school. A lot of who we are is so set when we're so young. And I feel much the same way. Like I was never really, I wasn't like in with the jocks. I wasn't in with the cheerleaders. I wasn't totally in with the nerds, although I totally fell in love with one and married him. But, you know, it was never, I never really identified with one group. You know, I kind of felt fine just talking to any and all of them if they even gave me the chance. Deb, I see, is raising her hand. That doesn't surprise me at all. All right, let's get into the topic of Ubuntu. Help others who are listening understand what is the core idea of Ubuntu.
All right. Now, I don't claim to be an expert, Amy. We have had this this discussion.
None of us are.
Yeah, like I had to change your when you're like, Clara is an expert, and I'm like, no, I'm just an enthusiast. I'm not I'm not an expert by any means.
But you know what? You grew up in this
Right.
kind of culture. So I mean, I would call you an expert, especially compared to
Right. Oh, yeah. So, okay. So to say a little bit about, you know, so I did a little bit of research to try and just make sure things are clear, you know, and a lot of what's out there really resonates with how I grew up in the culture, you know, and the core idea of Ubuntu is one of a life lived with dignity towards self and others and the environment and worship, right? So people will talk about Ubuntu is love, you know, and not love in a romantic way, but love as in love one another, you know, be there for others. You know, Ubuntu is truth, you know, it is peace, it is happiness, it is eternal optimism, you know, it is inner goodness. It is whether you're angered by your in-laws when they visit unexpectedly, or whether you're graceful about their month-long stay, so it's how you conduct yourself with dignity. So all of those things, and this is not something that's, say, groundbreaking, right? It's things that we're already doing, that most good-natured people do in our everyday lives. But growing up in the culture, it's something that's constantly ingrained in you, in the importance of. So in my culture, which is Shona from Zimbabwe, we call it UNU. Ubuntu is the Zulu word, which was popularized by Bishop Desmond Tutu because he's South African, but it's the same concept. In my culture, it's called UNU, so you're constantly being told like, hey, ita UNU, which just means be dignified, in what you do things with dignity, do things with heart, so.
That's beautiful. And I think there's something about, again, when you start to look across cultures and even languages that, I don't even know, is there a Western culture English equivalent for this word? Sometimes when we lack a word, it's like we almost lack the concept in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and that's exactly what it is. Like there is not an equivalence of, what's the equivalent of Ubuntu in Western culture? The close that I came to is really dignity, but it is not just dignity,
Right.
It is so much more than that. It is a way of being, and conducting yourself. You can almost say, it's general in all the things that we do, whether you're in business, whether you're in the home. It's not situational to say, oh, I have to behave this way when I'm over here, and I have to be a certain way when you're over there. It's like an overall aura that we should have.
Yeah. Go to school, work, and be all pleasant and polite, and then get on the road and be a total asshole, right? You've got to be
exactly. Yeah.
I love it. And one of the quotes that I saw often when I was reading and researching more on it was, I am because we are.
Yeah.
That was really beautiful as well. It's that sense that you are here in an existence to, you're something, a part of something that is greater than yourself, and just always being aware of that. In fact, the first time I heard about Ubuntu and the meditation that I was referring to earlier, she described it as a story where this man was in a village with children playing and decided to take a whole basket of candy and put it out by a tree and have the kids line up and decide to have them race to see who could get the candy first. And whoever got to the basket first got the candy. So the kids line up and he says, ready, set, go. And as they go to run, instead of just, pushing each other down or tearing off to see who could be the fastest, they all grabbed hands without even saying or doing anything. They just grabbed hands and ran together to the basket. And when they got there, they started to sit and enjoy and eat the candy together. And the man walks over and says, well, why did you not even race? Why there was no one winner? And he's like, I don't understand. And the kid said, well, if one of us is happy but the others are unhappy, how can we be happy?
Yeah, so that makes total sense. Like selfishness is greatly discouraged, right? So just talking about like growing up in the culture and how it's carried out in the home, selfishness is greatly discouraged, so regularly you'd hear the phrase like, hey, how now uno, which means you have no dignity when you try to do something that's selfish. So imagine, I have this distinct memory of visiting one of my son's friends' homes. I wasn't visiting them particularly, but we were having I guess it was like a play date, right, in this home. And so there were other kids there. And the little boy who was whose home that belonged to, was upset. The other kids, I guess, were going all over his toys, and he was telling them, don't do this, don't do that. And the other boys were protesting. And he's like, my house, my rules, And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is so foreign and so opposite to what I teach my boys. Like when we're at home and someone comes, you have to give up your toys. If your friend wants to play with your toys, they have first preference, So you go out of your way to make visitors into your home feel comfortable, so you have to give up your bed, which, to my kids who are really being brought up in Western culture, no matter how much I try to instill some of those values, they're still a little this is mine, why do I have to give up my bed? Why do I? But it's those type of things growing up that are always ingrained in you. Like you have to give up your comfort in order for the other person to be comfortable. Yeah.
It's not like an always giving up thing, because when it's reciprocal, when it's like you're in a culture and society where that's everyone's practice, everyone's just working to make everyone comfortable.
Yeah, because in that situation, you can imagine they're in your home, you're probably comfortable, they are not. So at that point, whose comfort is paramount, because you're already in your environment where you're comfortable, right? So it becomes paramount that the other person who's new to this environment becomes comfortable,
Yeah. It's a great practice in empathy as well. I was joking with Clara when we were talking earlier this week as well, because, it does bleed into, I feel like, other cultures even within Africa. My dad's Egyptian. And I remember when we went to visit my cousins the first time, my dad had warned us, like, if you say that you like something, they're going to give it to you. And I remember telling, it's so common for us to be like, oh, I like your jacket, when you're seeing somebody, getting ready to start your day. And I think we were getting ready to go out and do some sightseeing. And I told my cousin Dahlia, I was like, I love your shirt. She's like, do you want it? Do you want it? I'll just take it off. I'll go change right now. I was like, no. I was like, my dad was right. And just, it's just a common practice. But I can imagine bringing up two boys in our Western society, there's like a lot of, opposites there that you're contending with. I'm curious, what are some ways that, carrying out the philosophy of Ubuntu in the workplace could actually happen?
Yes. So I think there are two things that like probably your listeners would identify with that are like classic Ubuntu principles, but no one, which is really unfortunate for the philosophy, right? That this is not widely acknowledged within our Western culture and business environment. And that is the idea of the sharing economy and the business response to the pandemic. So, while I was reading all these great things that are happening, to me, this seemed like such commonplace things, and again, it goes back to, I was thinking like, okay, why is everybody, say, for example, the response to the pandemic, right? Now, businesses are being much more intuitive to what's going on with their employees, how could we make this work, and people are all excited about this change and accommodation. And it just seemed to me like, well, wasn't that the natural thing to do? Like, why is this such a big deal? Why do companies feel like they're doing their employees a favor when all along it feels like this is how things were always supposed to be, right? And then you have the sharing economy. Now, companies like Uber, Airbnb are all really, when you look at the core of what they do, is Ubuntu. You're sharing what you have with someone. Now, obviously in Western countries and in the economies that we have, we've monetized that, right? They've been good at monetizing that, but the basic principle is the same. Like, you have something that someone can use when you're not using it. Why not make that go around? Why do you need to keep 7 homes when someone else can be using that home you have, instead of it sitting empty? And it's just a no-brainer. Like, why hadn't this happened before? Why is it a concept that now businesses are only catching up to say, hey, we could be collective and communal and this will work great, So yeah, those are the two things that really stand out to me when it comes to businesses.
Those are great examples, because I think sometimes, when you, especially in a very capitalistic society like ours, you do tend to think, when you hear things like sharing economy, that might get people a little bit sort of, puckered up, let's say. But, at the same time, there's opportunity there. I mean, clearly, when you've got businesses like that have kind of taken those things into the account, how can we show up and serve, not just our customers, but the greater good, and make use of resources, extra resources that we don't have. I think that's a really cool way to start thinking about ways that your company or business could start to like give back by looking what you have in excess, and just kind of taking that Ubuntu philosophy and saying, how can we take these extra resources and put them towards the rest of the community? That's great. I love that. I find that really inspirational. But then I run an organization like this, so it's like it's a given to me. I'm like, yeah, I want everybody to do.
But then you always have a lawyer who comes back and tells you what risk you're taking by being kind, right?
Right? You know what? I'll take the risk. I'll just deal with
Of
it
course. Yeah. Yeah.
after. If they're all that bad, then I just don't know. Like, so out in society, so we talked about Ubuntu in the home, we talked about Ubuntu at work. What about when people are kind of out and about in society? Like, take us to Zimbabwe, you're out on the busy streets, or whatever kind of example you want to give us. How does it play out in society?
Okay. So taking you to Zimbabwe, how it plays out. So you always hear from people who go to, say, African countries or developing countries about how, oh my gosh, everyone there is so kind, I cannot believe the kindness. They took us into our homes, like that is how Ubuntu plays out in families. You know how I told you earlier about you give up the comfort of your family for the stranger, right? So, and so that's how it would play out. Now, there's a bit of like we can get very academic about Ubuntu in society, because then there is the ongoing argument that it is not really compatible with our modern society and the economic system that promotes individualism and like an unequal distribution of wealth, which is true to an extent, but I would still argue that a lot of Ubuntu principles, they are already proactive. And then later on, I know we're going to talk about multiculturalism and what that means, but this really ties into multiculturalism in that when you're looking at another culture through the lens of your own culture, it's difficult to appreciate the things that are already making that make that culture work, when your measurement is through the lens of another culture. So.
Yeah, no, I don't mind getting academic. I really don't. I think it's fascinating because, again, I think the more we can dig in and understand how, when, and where, the more we're able to implore it into our lives. And I guess it's just, I think I was just, as you were talking, it reminded me of the phrase, and it's a very common American phrase, like rising tides raise all ships. It's like when you create a swell of opportunity and money, it benefits. If you're kind of practicing something like Ubuntu, it's helping everybody. So it's not like you're behind. It's disparities of a 1% population and then lowering poverty line. But then we start to get more economical and political. So
and there's a very Ubuntu thing that you do as Together Digital that I absolutely love. And I think, like I loved it from the beginning. It's what got me to stay into this. It's the ask and gives, right? So you have a communal, so it's almost communal, right? So you have a group of women, I present my problem, whatever I have. I might be looking for a job, I might be looking for a group of people to brainstorm a business idea with, and then you all come together, right? Again, talking about, it just reminds me of Hillary Clinton's book, It Takes a Village, which is really an African proverb, right? But it's everybody coming together to look at a problem in a communal way, and then going through a process of figuring out, okay, have you done this? Have you done that? Have you tried this? And at the end of it, you emerge with a solution. So instead of someone being out there alone, toiling or paying thousands of dollars for someone to tell you what they think about your business or how you should progress in your career, you almost have like this communal idea. What word am I looking for? When you bring things together.
Practice, yeah.
Like, there's this particular word I'm looking for that I can't, crowdsourcing ideas. That's what yeah. So that idea, that crowdsourcing of ideas to come up with a solution, that's very Ubuntu, so that's one of those things that you'll see happening in real life. And you guys do it extremely well as Together Digital. Yeah.
I had an inkling that it might be the ask and gives. And I agree. It's absolutely one of the most phenomenal aspects, because it becomes a cultural aspect when you put it into practice consistently. So even though we're very hardworking, ambitious women. I love how our members are so open and honest about what they ask, and then so open and honest about what they're willing to share as well. There's no power hoarding, secret keeping. It's just like, here's how I did it. And
Exactly. Yeah.
it does. It benefits so many of our women. We see women get raises and promotions or starting their own businesses, or just a general sense of solitude, when things are just really chaos and you really need to feel connected to people. So I agree. I mean, I still am not seeing many arguments against Ubuntu, but what about, I don't know, did we touch on it? Was there anything else you wanted to touch on how Ubuntu can help the world in business practices?
In business practices, so there is, this is a big one, so it's the exaltation of females, right? It's like an obvious one. And there's a story that I want to talk about to illustrate this in the culture that I grew up, and then like in how this had practical applications in the world, right? So in my culture, which is Shona, the Shona people are the majority of Zimbabweans. There is this idea of the importance of women, but I think over the years with Christianity and modernization, it has somewhat been diluted because, we all sign on to this Christian ideal of how to live life, and we've somewhat lost the traditional ideas in some of these Ubuntu in Ubuntu philosophy, right? But anyway, this one has lasted through the test of time, and this is the importance of the female, right? So, for instance, when people get married in Shona culture, the guy has to pay a dowry towards the bride's family, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is usually a set amount of money that the family determines, and the idea behind this is not so much the monetary exchange, but the importance of bringing the two families together. Now, this dowry, it's never meant to be completed, say that payment, so to speak, in a single day. It can go over the course of a lifetime, right? Because the idea is they want to keep this connectedness together within their family. But the one thing that is of utmost importance that must be complete is what's called the mother's cow or the mother's dowry. It's whatever the family decides needs to go to the mom, right? To the bride's mom. So you as a family, you could be marrying into the poorest of families that can never afford to pay off that dowry. But the one thing they all must strive towards, and that they make sure they do, is to pay up whatever the bride's family has determined the mother needs, right? And so this to me exemplifies the importance of women. Now, if I can go a step further and tell you about how in a family, quarrels happen, dysfunctional families, not dysfunctional families, but they can come a time when, say, there's a lot of strife between family members, parents and children, right? I can be in a fight with my dad, right? Like a physical fight, and never ask for forgiveness. And it's okay. Like there are no repercussions that come from that, from a traditional point of view, but that can never be with my mom,
right?
With the mother. Like one of the biggest sins that will happen is, say, for your mom to pass away and you have not made peace with her. I mean, it is such taboo that the culture generally refers to, say, people who are downtrodden, homeless, whatever years, they must have done something to their mom, And so so the culture just thrives to make sure that the mom, is at peace with whatever decisions the family makes, because that's the last person you want to upset. Now, to me, that's really a good reflection of empowerment, power. Well, not empowerment, because the power is already there, but just showing the importance of women, right? Now, on a global scale, I was thinking about Rwanda, right? And I don't know, if you guys are not familiar with Rwanda, you can research. After the 1994 genocide, 25 years later, Rwanda has emerged as the country in the world with the most women in government. Like, it is a country that has come from devastation to millions rising out of poverty, zero tolerance when it comes to sexual violence, and a population that is extremely well educated, and this is the power of women, because the women at the time of the genocide, after the genocide, decided, you know what, we have had it with these men. They cannot run a country. They just went us into a genocide. We hate each other. And they just started efforts to get Rwanda back into reconciliation with each other and run the government. And there's no other government that has risen at such, now I forget the statistics, but I think it's something like 24% of seats in government are women. And they have literally taken that country out of the ashes. So just think about that, what it could mean to the world if we could have a global system that was dominated by women. It shows you the focus for women is not so much on dollars and cents. The focus is on community, which is again an Ubuntu principle. The focus is on community. It's on trust. It's on relationships, right? And that dignity. And that's the world you get.
I agree. That sounds amazing. Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember learning about Rwanda in school and, and reading up on it, but I honestly hadn't read or learned much about what had happened since. And it's just, it's devastating to kind of sit by and watch and wait. But I agree. I think that's why I've always tried to encourage and empower others, whether they feel like they don't often see their gifts, because our culture and society tells you as women, you have to fit into a box, you have to look a certain way, you have to sound a certain way, you have to be a certain way.
Yeah.
A really great podcast and Power Lounge episode on that. The Power of You. If you all want to go back and take a listen to it, we talk a lot about conformity as a form of social control, especially for women, in the way that we lead, the way that we show up. It was really thought-provoking with another member of ours, Dr. Margie Sorrento. So yes, 100%. And I also, Clara, as you were talking, I just think about the dynamics of, difficult relationships when you kind of take into account Ubuntu. It's like all of a sudden now, like, you're showing empathy for those who maybe, a lot of times people are like, oh, my in-laws, but like, you spend your entire life basically trying to honor and repay them for, your partner. And I think that's really kind of cool. It's like, well, what kind of world would that be if we, there'd be no more Jerry Springer, I guess. I don't know. That might be a loss for some, not for me. But yeah, it's really, really, really cool. Okay. I could go on about this forever. I think it's just fascinating, but I want to talk a little bit about multiculturalism, because that's another passion point of yours. And we've had a few conversations about it. How would you distinguish the difference between diversity, because that's obviously a big topic now, as it should be, and hopefully will continue to be, and multiculturalism?
That's a good one. Okay, diversity and multiculturalism. So obviously, this is something I've thought a lot about when initially I started my business, and I called it Multicultural Solutions. It's like it came naturally, but then I started thinking about why that, what does it actually mean, right? So I spent quite a bit of time thinking about that. And I think the easiest way to say this is like diversity acknowledges differences amongst individuals, right? So we can accept that, you're white, I'm Black, those type of things. That's diversity. Now, multiculturalism goes a step further, and I'm not just going to accept the difference, okay? I'm going to actually work. I mean, I'm not going to only acknowledge, or see the difference, but I'm actually going to accept that difference, right? So a lot of corporations and the way our world works, right? So we talk about diversity and inclusion in corporations, which is great. Now, for a corporation to actually be multicultural is, you're going to adopt that culture that comes with that diverse person, right? So if you're tooting yourself as having what, 50% Hispanics working with you, are you allowing them to speak Spanish? Do you have Spanish literature in your corporate culture, in your corporate collateral? Those type of things. So you're actually going a step further. If you say, oh yeah, welcome to all Muslims, are you giving those employees a section of, say, your corporate headquarters or what have you, that they can actively go and pray on. And, you're like, are you actually actively taking in their culture and accepting it, that it's the norm, along with everything else you have? So that's the difference between, say, diversity and multiculturalism. Is diversity, it's like, yeah, we can see it. You can see diversity.
Right. You can
But
see.
yeah, multiculturalism, you're actually adopting and acting on some of those things. Now, obviously, in a corporate environment, you do want uniformity, because, you need the synergy there, right? So it becomes an aspirational type of thing that we are constantly going to try to work towards, but we are not totally there. But that doesn't mean in our personal lives,
Right.
you can't practice it, right? Yeah. So as friends, Amy, when you come to my house and I'm like, Amy, leave your shoes at the door, you're not offended by that, because you you embrace my culture and what I like and stuff like that. And likewise, if I go to your home, I don't try to impose what I think your house should be. I just totally embrace the culture that's in your home. So yeah.
I love it. That is great. I think I was just spoiled growing up with a family. My dad's from Egypt, my mom's from the States, but we grew up in the middle of nowhere. So I looked a lot different than most of the kids around me, but I was exposed so early on to different culture and customs that it made it easier, even though I was living and feeling like I was in two different worlds, oftentimes between my Egyptian family and my very American family. It kind of gave me that opportunity to feel more comfortable in the environments of other cultures.
Yeah.
And then finding it fascinating because the customs and the cultures to me as well have some benefit in the sense that it can also be a sign of respect, right? When you sort of understand, know, and come along with the custom or respect the custom. Like they don't have to ask you to take off your shoes. You just know when you walk in to take them off. Like that's just such a nice sort of way to show up for people in a small, subtle way. I was talking with Myra Aldine. You probably know her from Perspective.
I know Myra. Yeah, with Vector.
Similar conversations, and we were just talking about how about multiculturalism and how it's not even really employed in business or politics, which is kind of mind-blowing to me because in Egypt, if you show somebody the bottom of your foot, it's like an insult. So you don't sit with your legs crossed and your foot propped up on your leg to where they could see the bottom of it. Or, in other cultures, you don't shake hands, you bow. And so not teaching or embracing or learning about cultures that you interact with, you're really kind of putting yourself almost at a deficit and not really advantage.
Yeah. And I really feel like multiculturalism almost has a transformative power, right? I always think about when I worked at the museum. So the museum was like my first real experience working in a corporate environment. And one of the things that I had always assumed, because of course, when you're growing up in a particular culture, you assume different things about your culture. So there's this craft that kids regularly do so in Hispanic culture, it's called God's eye, and we grew up making a lot of those during summer, like you'd make them with grass, you'd make them with yarn, different materials, right? So, and I always thought it is a Shona thing. It is a Zimbabwean thing. Now, when I started working at the museum and I was directing Latin American Culture Fest, guess what? I came across God's eye, and I'm like, this is African.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Like, how is this Hispanic? And I had so many such experiences of meeting other cultures because I worked with really everybody from different cultures on all 5 continents, because the museum did all these festivals. And in each of those cultures, I started realizing there is something about that culture that members of the other culture think, oh, this is our origin. And so you start to realize, and this was part of my process too, like it has this transformative cultural power. If we just see that in all of us, like, you know what, we are really very similar, right? So I could talk to the group that was from the Latin Culture Fest, and I would talk to a group that was from the Asian Culture Fest, and I'll talk to a group that was from the African Culture, and have the exact same conversation about things, but the only person in common there is me, right? They don't know that about each other. And I was just thinking to myself, imagine if as a world, we all had those experiences, then you really start looking at each other just in a very, very human way. Like we all want the same things. It's everything that we want, it's very Ubuntu, it's very, it's, what's the word I'm looking for? It's at the base of who we are as people, you know. But then at some point, I guess because of corporate greed, again, talking about corporations, you know, you bring in this idea of capitalism and money and economy, and that starts getting distorted, you know. Yeah.
Makes sense. Gee, I wonder why you and I are entrepreneurs.
Exactly. That's the reason why I'm like, okay, enough of this.
You're doing a phenomenal job helping businesses start to do those things as well, and taking those things into account into the work that you're doing as well, which again is just, it is a fantastic way to kind of infuse that into society. So I'm proud of you. Can you help our listeners understand multiculturalism? I think we kind of covered this, but if there's anything else, can benefit their diversity efforts?
Say that, Amy, again.
Can you help our listeners understand how multiculturalism can benefit their diversity efforts?
Oh, so how multiculturalism can benefit their diversity efforts. So we have been talking a lot about the interconnectedness, right? If there's anything that you take away from this talk today, it's just realizing that interconnectedness between people at our core, you know, facing problems, you know, even the problems, your problems of equity, equality, social identity, you know, it could be even personal philosophy, you know, when you embrace multiculturalism, when you embrace ideas like Ubuntu, those provide that transformative power as people. Because one of the things that I think we can really all agree with is, after the pandemic, we have all realized just how much we want to get back to those basics, right? Of what is it that creates that balance between work and what we really want, which is time with our families, you know, in our communities, you know, our communities coming together. You know, I read somewhere the argument that if it was not for the pandemic, maybe George Floyd would have just not have been as big as it is. So right there, she tells you there is something at the core of us as people that's yearning to get back to those Ubuntu principles of, you know what, I just want to be loved. I just want to be in community. I just want to be able to trust the next person. You know, I just want to be able to work collaboratively and collectively with my coworker, you know. So as business owners, as people who are in C-suites, you could be thinking about that. Like, yes, I totally get that at the end of the day, you know, you have shareholders to think about and all of that, but just imagine what a world would be like if we're all a little bit like Rwanda, right? And how much they have put first place those principles of Ubuntu in how they're going to govern their country and all the success they have had. So, yeah.
That's so beautiful, Clara. I 100% agree. What you're leaving by doing these things is a legacy. And I think, to me, that's more valuable than any amount of money you could stuff into my pockets, but that's just me speaking. All right. Anybody have any questions for Clara about Ubuntu, about ways in which she's gone and made it work for her? I would love to give you guys time to ask a question. If you have it, you can come off of mute, or you could put it in the chat. If you do not, then I will go to my last question and we'll wrap it up.
I just want to say thank you. I love this. Feeling this is definitely how I like to live my life. I think when you're talking about how you were in school, that was always me too. There was like never an exclusion area. I kind of fit in wherever, and that's been a big part of how I like to live. But yeah, I think the points that you made about the businesses that succeed because they think about this, even just if you think about like climate change, it's thinking about like one business or one country instead of the whole world that gets us into those decisions where we feel like we can't make the efforts that need to make change. So yeah, I just really appreciate you talking about this and your culture and sharing that with us, Clara. Thanks.
You're welcome. Let me share with you too that, so talking about the principles and how I have decided, like, this is what I am going to do for my business. When I first started, I remember wanting to do a lot of things, but, I just could not afford, right? So I want to do ABC, I want branding, I need this, but it is just too expensive. So one of the things that I started doing for my business is I so identify with someone who's starting out on their own and cannot afford the things that they need for their business to function. And so I just thought to myself, if I'm a little kind, I obviously don't want to say give away a product that's $2,000 for $500, right? At the end of the day, what I want is to be paid what I think that is worth. So what happens if I agree to work with people and we get on a payment plan? This is how much you're going to pay, right? But you can make payments on a schedule that suits you instead of me telling you, like, this is what it is, and I'm sorry, I can't help you, right? And so I love doing that with businesses, because then I feel really helpful to others. Like, we can work together and we can get on a plan that works for both of us. I get paid what I would like for you to pay me. And at the same time, you get the service that you need from my business.
That's phenomenal. I do see that more and more often. I mean, and even just the request for more equitable pricing or equitable access to certain types of services and things like that. I mean, it's small, but like even the acupuncturist that I go to, I love it. It's community style. So you kind of come in and everybody's in separate recliners and you're staying dressed. It just gets your arms, she gets your arms and your legs and face and head, or if you need it. And she has a pay scale, and it's like you pay on the honor system what you can afford, either 20, 30 or $40 for your visit each time. And I just think that's tremendous, because there are some people who could afford to pay the 40, and there's some people who really benefit from the service who could get away with paying 20. And I keep meaning to ask her, but it feels a little nosy, but I am kind of curious, like, how does that change our bottom line? And then also I could almost imagine when you're creating more accessibility to people through something like that, you're actually just going to end up with more customers. You're not like narrowing yourself out of a certain socioeconomic class, because certain like acupuncture can get really expensive, but I personally also find it really amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great example. I love it, Clara. And again, good for you. It's just, it's not the way we hear and see it being told to be done. And I love that you've just kind of, after all these years.
Yeah, because my business coach is always telling me I need to be firm.
I mean, I don't know. I there's something beautiful about
But
being
I'm like, I am going to overrule this, because I feel like that's at my core.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to break. That is a hard thing to break. Well, the last question I had for you, and I wasn't sure if you had any notes down to build on this, but as a multiculturalist, what are some of the challenges that you face when it comes to educating and encouraging others to consider cultural practices outside of their own? So like your coach.
I know, right? Gosh. So the challenge is, like with anything that requires change, right? You're dealing with set mindsets. You're dealing with a lot of minds that don't want to think outside the box. Maybe it could be a lack of creativity, in just thinking like, oh, this is possible, So going back to the idea of, say, corporate America, like, what is there? Like, I know it is so foreign to think like, okay, I take inspiration from Larry David here, right? Curb your greed. Okay, curb your greed. Like, how can you imagine, like, if we were just to have, like, does a CEO need to earn, I don't know, $180 million in a year? Like, what are you? So it's things like that. That's like, how do you convince people to just curb this part about themselves that's always going to want, right? And there's no boundaries. So that's the hardest thing. It's just being able to, like, look, you can just look at what you need, what your community needs, and it has to end somewhere. But as human, it's I guess it's human nature. I don't know. In some people, it's definitely not in me. In some people, to just have like this bottomless pit of want and need.
Right. Well, and I think I was just doing, I did a talk yesterday for Paycor about how to use the basic principles of mindfulness to help with burnout. To talk about bringing additional like multicultural views into a very common American issue, although it's probably common across the world, given what we've all been through these last 2 years.
Uh-huh.
Those things was non-attachment. And, you know, even I just have really started to embrace this notion, non-attachment from a material standpoint, but then also from an outcome standpoint.
Uh-huh.
In a lot of ways, it sounds really weird, but it is. It's rather.
Yeah, it's very weird. You know, like how do you stop businesses from wanting competition between team A and team B? If we divvy up the work, can we not get to the same outcome? You know, but no one is brave enough to try that. So it's those type of things like, you know, we really need to think outside the box and imagine what's possible that we have not thought of. That's the biggest challenge, I would think, because, you know, people are very quick to dismiss like, oh, that will never work, you know.
Yeah. I mean, psychology lets us know that like our brain, we make so many decisions and our brain is lazy. We only use what, like 8-10% of it. I don't know. My brain doesn't remember how much it uses of itself, but we're always creating shortcuts. And so a lot of what you're talking about, it's hard because it's hardwired into a lot of us in the way that we're brought up, what we're taught to value and things like that. And even hedonic adaptation, which I brought up a couple of times yesterday in my talk as well, which is just essentially your brain going, oh, we've gotten the thing we thought we wanted, and now we just kind of need to want something more, something else. It's kind of like when we're dreaming of that new car and you finally get the new car. And for the first like week or two, you're like, oh, I'm so happy I have my new car. And then after like 3 or 4 weeks, it's a car like any other car. And you're already like,
exactly,
cars that aren't yours.
Yeah. I totally agree, you know. And then with Ubuntu, there's the extra difficulty there of a philosophy that does not have a philosopher that you can point to, right? And to say, oh yeah, it's written in ABC book by all these philosophers that have philosophized on this for thousands and thousands of years. You know, it's just a way of life. So it's even more difficult because then there's, until recently, you know, you can't point to an origination apart from Black people have been practicing this since immemorial.
Right. Well, I think it just goes to speak to the strength of it, that it doesn't require a figurehead. It doesn't require being written down. It requires people like you sharing the stories, sharing the philosophy, sharing the wisdom of it, so that the rest of you might go out and start to talk about it with your friends, your family, your coworkers. And to me, that's how it continues on for sure. So Clara, thank you so much. This was really fun. And I could just sit, as you already know, and talk with you about all of this stuff for hours. I hope all of you that are listening felt inspired and encouraged and interested to just dig in and learn more. For those of you who are members, you can go into Slack and ask Clara your questions directly. If you're not a member, again, check us out at www.togetherindigital.com. Clara, do you have anything you want to leave us with?
Go Ubuntu.
I love it. Go Ubuntu. All right. Happy Friday, everyone. Take care, and we shall see you next week. Thanks, Clara.
Bye, everyone.
Today. Thanks, everybody.